Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of stories affecting the Sikh community around the world, and in today's show, we look back and give our perspectives on an outrageous protest that took place just before Christmas as our New Zealand friends celebrated their Nagar Kirtan. Meanwhile, in India, at a huge conference, Hindutva forces publicly demand forced conversions of Sikhs and Muslims and a cap on minority religious populations, amongst many other shocking statements. More concerning, the official tourist office of Delhi and other state institutions were equally vocal in support at the event. Who, other than an extremist Hindu, would now feel safe visiting India, never mind living there? Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. But joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in the meantime in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. We have a countdown to New Year's, and it is exciting. Our final couple of shows of the year. And just so you're aware, due to cutbacks at the station, this will be my second to last episode for now. We'll see what happens down the road with budgets and all that fun stuff. But for the time being, I will be leaving the program, and Angus will be there to guide you through. But unfortunately, he'll be on his own. So it's been a great time here. It's been exciting. It's been educational, and I will continue to bring information about Khalistan and about the movement to my other channels. And of course, if anything pops up here in Vancouver, of course, I will share it with Angus as well to report. But again, thank you to all the viewers, and this is the second to last night that I'll be on the air with you. So with that, Angus, let's move on to the show tonight.
Indeed. And in the meantime, James and I together, for today at least and tomorrow, we'll be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And as usual, we'll take a look at a few of your comments which came in before Christmas on some of the videos before then. So we'll take a look at that at the end of the show. In the meantime, James, what are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, I've got a bit of a unshaved face here, and that's, as I said before the Christmas break there, it's actually because I have to grow it in a bit for a TV show that I will be working on upcoming. So again, forgive the rugged look there. But in any event, let's take a look at some other issues of much more importance that have been happening around the world. And of course, we have seen that Sikh actually, this is one of the reasons I'm bringing this article, is because they are calling it Hindu protesters outside the Bangladeshi High Commission, but when they refer to the Sikhs, they call them activists, which I think is a great context because it gives more of a positive view of the Sikh community. And when you look at what was going on, of course, there was a little scuffle, a bit of a clash there, but at the end of the day, it wasn't violent. It was just more verbal.
A protest outside the Bangladeshi High Commission in London on Saturday briefly turned tense when pro-Khalistan Sikh activists confronted a small group of Hindu protesters, prompting police intervention. The Khalistan movement seeks an independent Sikh state, dating back to negotiations around the partition of Punjab during India and Pakistan's independence in 1947. The demonstration was connected to reports of violence against Hindus in Bangladesh. During the protest, Paramjit Singh Pama, identified by organizers as a coordinator of the Khalistan referendum campaign, was involved in a brief scuffle with an Indian Hindu protester. Metropolitan police officers quickly intervened, separating the individuals and dispersing the groups. No injuries were reported.
Now, my apologies, like I said, in Bangladesh, but I meant to say in London relating to the treatment of Sikhs in Bangladesh. So my apologies for the slip there. However, what was significant there is, again, that they were referring to the Sikhs as activists, whereas the Hindus were the Hindus were the protesters. And that makes a significant difference because each one has certain undertones and connotations to the term. And when you look at that and the full report, of course, they also go into naming certain individuals that have been identified by India as terrorists. But again, they bring to the forefront the fact that India has proven absolutely nothing. They've produced no evidence, no credible reports, and nothing to back up these unsubstantiated claims that we know they are always bringing out against anyone who speaks out against Modi and the government. and anybody that's participating as an activist for the Khalistan homeland. So once again, it just shows the change in the attitude and the narrative of the media, that it's finally starting to show some respect to the Sikh people and to the Khalistan movement in the global context. So I felt that was important to bring up, and I didn't want to go too much into the actual protest and activist event as a whole. I know that Angus is looking at the one in New Zealand tonight as well, so I didn't want to go too far. But by all means, go on and check out the video, check out the information if you haven't seen that already. Once again, it was more of a verbal altercation from the two sides, and police were already there trying to make sure that it stayed peaceful with the two groups, and overall it did. It was just a verbal confrontation. So again, nothing too major, but at the same time, I thought it was major in the way that the media is changing their narrative when it comes to the Khalistan movement. As we go on, of course, Angus will be covering the incident in New Zealand, and if needed, I do have a video queued up for you, Angus, on that, if you would like to look at that. But in any event, we are moving on here, and we're talking about violence. Something that, Angus, you and I talk about quite often is the criminality, youth crime, drug crimes, as well as AI and other things when it comes to mass acts of violence and individual ones. Now, a new site, or I should say a returning site, that was very prominent in the 90s and the 2000s and was instrumental in actually preventing several mass shootings in the United States and other locations. The site was #1 around the world before it was commonplace for the education, awareness, and activist sites to be online, and really led the way to that era. As we look at it, we can look at whether it is the mass attacks, such as the Lapu Lapu Day attack in Vancouver, where a individual drove into a crowd, killing and actually taking part in one of the largest acts of terror at a Vancouver event in our history. So again, it shows that there is a big disconnect when it comes to the actual events, the attackers, the mental health crisis that they may or may not be involved in, or the extremist conversions that go on online. There's also concerns when it comes to the mental health crisis, because there are more and more reliance on what are referred to as AI therapists. And essentially, youth and others that are in crisis are going online and going to these AI therapy bots. And these bots are trained to actually be more agreeable and amenable to the ideas of the user. Therefore, they are not giving any type of critique or critical conversation when it comes to acts of suicide, or in the case several years ago where an AI bot actually was involved in an attempted assassination of Queen Elizabeth II. So again, it shows the dangers that are going on, and there are currently several lawsuits around the world against AI companies that are utilizing these bots in such a fashion to exploit the users without any repercussions or any type of liability and responsibility. And that's where ethical AI, that Angus and I have talked about quite a bit on this show, really comes into play. So an essential thing. Now, the youthandviolence.com website, as I said, it addressed the root causes of violence, peer influence, and media saturation. So a big part of it is educating not just parents and youth, but also law enforcement, teachers, community advocates, all these different groups on the warning signs, the indicators, and preventable ways to deal with violence before it happens. In most school shootings, and almost 90% of them have actually been proven that they could have been stopped had people had not only had the information and realized how to identify the warning signs and indicators prehand, but also what they call leakage. And that is when a youth or an attacker, when it comes to even with the Bondi Beach attack, when you look at the history, whether it is online communications with friends, with chat rooms, and or with family and friends offline, there is what's referred to as leakage. In school shootings, almost 90%, and some say over 90%, could be prevented because there was leakage. There was claims and indicators that were clear as day in hindsight, but unfortunately, hindsight doesn't work to be a tool for prevention. When it comes to the mass acts, such as I said with Bondi Beach, and public events such as the Lapu Lapu Day events, according to the FBI and other United States intelligence studies, there have been over 46% with leakage, meaning that they could have been prevented as well. So this site was a leading edge site that was used by educators. It was used by universities, including everybody from Harvard to Cornell were using this site as well as a reference material. Now, it's also been used by the African American lectionary in Africa. It is a reference for the United Methodist Church and many other ministries, and as I said, schools, universities, colleges, all that worldwide. So when you look at this, it is a big information coming out that the site is relaunching in January, and the site will be available to everyone. The soft launch has already happened at youthandviolence.com, and it will be translated into many languages to ensure that whether it's a new Canadian, somebody from the UK that's just immigrated, or people who have lived there a lifetime have access to this information and education. A huge step forward in hopefully preventing some of the mass attacks that we are seeing on the rise, the political violence, and as well school attacks as well. So with that said, I hope that you'll check out youthandviolence.com to help to identify and understand the indicators and warning signs of mass acts of violence. As we look at that, of course, we know that racism plays a big role in a lot of these events, or in terms of individual attacks and group attacks on individuals as well. And throughout this year, there have been many stories that have been very significant throughout the British Columbia, Canada, and worldwide. But here on one of our local papers, of course, they have listed some of the biggest amazing people from 2025. And this particular article refers to Jaz Singh Dhaliwal, who is a lawyer who ran for public office in the bordering city of White Rock. And when I say bordering city, I just mean border to where I'm at. It's about 5 minutes away to White Rock. And the problems that he faced, he really challenged himself to step out of his comfort zone, to be more involved in public advocacy, public events, and of course, politics. With that said, as I said, he ran in the city's by-election in White Rock, but what he faced was an unexpected and unacceptable level of hate, of racism, of bigotry, and just plain ignorance by some of the people in White Rock. And it goes on in this article to actually describe some of the things that he was said, that was said to him, either in person, at events, in front of other members of the public, or online. And they were everything from threats to just racist comments, telling him to get out of Canada, telling him to go back to India, go back to Surrey, all of these different things. So it shows that there is still that major tension when it comes to racism and the need for further understanding and awareness of not only the issue of racism in itself, but something that Angus and I have had as a goal on this program is to raise more awareness, to allow people to understand what are the principles of Sikhi? What is the culture? What is the impact of the Sikh people on our communities in such a positive and a historic manner? With the education and understanding that we've been trying to bring, we've been hoping that more people will understand Sikhi and the Sikh people, so that this way it opens up the door to more acceptance, more understanding, more compassion, and of course more cooperation. And that, again, is something that we hope will continue on. We want to see change in the world when it comes to the acceptance of all people. And that is one of the major pillars of Sikhi that both Angus and I have such a deep respect for. And that is, of course, that everybody is equal and that everybody should be challenged to be their best. Whether they're Muslim, whether they're Christian, whether they're Buddhist, whether they're Hindu, or whether they're Sikh, that they encourage you to be the best of who you can be. And this is a major foundational point that I think is going to help to see Khalistan succeed when it happens, because they are going to be treating everyone as equals. They are going to be accepting. They are going to be caring for the people who are at the lowest rung of society, dealing with medical issues, mental health, or whatever. They are going to lift them up. They are going to allow them to have the supports that are needed and to contribute to the community in a positive manner, regardless of their belief system. So again, I just thought that was very interesting to bring up. And it also shows where we are in terms of the political violence. It's not just hate-filled speech. It, as we've seen over the last year, or several years even, we've seen an increase in political violence of racial profiling of individuals and groups, whether that is the Sikh drivers in the US and Canada, or it is anything else that we've been looking at on this program or that you've seen in the news. And in a final report tonight, we are going to jump over to the Times of India and look at a quick story there and the area of Belagavi. And there, a senior took a child of 3 years old into a pub and restaurant, or a bar and restaurant, and actually forced him to drink alcohol alongside of him. This child was 3 years old, and instead of anybody intervening, including the bar owners and the bar staff, some people chose instead to film it on their cell phones while this child was consuming alcohol, putting the child's health and life at risk. Now, this individual, due to the fact that the video was online, is now under investigation, as the same goes to the pub owners or the bar owners and the staff that were on hand. They could face years in jail for this action because it is, of course, against the Child Care and Protection of Children's Act in India to allow a minor to consume alcohol. And for a minor there, they consider that to be under 21 years of age. This individual, as I said, can face up to 7 years in prison and a 1 lakh rupees fine as well. And hopefully they really do make an example. This 3-year-old could have gone into alcohol shock, could have led to all kinds of difficulties and challenges, and could have resulted in death. And for those people that were bystanders and chose to just film it instead of intervening, I think that they should feel some shame and responsibility as well in that, because it very well could have turned out much worse, Angus.
Yeah, I mean, how responsible. I mean, I don't even need to respond to that. I think it's just, I shake my head in disbelief. I mean, it's, I think our audience can make their own mind up about that one. Let me just jump back to your first story, James. I think this is quite an important story about the protests in London, actually, outside the Bangladesh embassy. This did, of course, this has happened over a series of days just leading up to Christmas. And I did actually follow it on the news. And it does refer back to stuff that we've talked about in the past, actually, about particularly when Sheikh Hasina was driven out of Bangladesh last summer by the people, that sort of popular uprising. Now, after she was she fled literally for her life after these sort of mobs took to the streets and demanded a return to democracy rather than authoritarian rule, then of course the anger of the mobs, and particularly primarily Muslim mobs, did on the extreme ends start to target Hindus, and sadly there were terrible reports of Hindus being victimised, terrible violence being perpetrated against them. And you looked on right-wing social media in India, and all the usual suspects on the right wing, particularly the Hindutva extremists, they were all reporting there was a genocide going on. Now, it wasn't a genocide. It was it was in no way, shape or form a genocide in any definition of the term. But what it was, there was targeted violence against the minority Hindu population in Bangladesh. It was a result of anger, pent-up anger after this sort of rule of Sheikh Hasina. Now, at the time, we did say, okay, well, yeah, absolutely, we fully support the Hindus standing up and protest, saying you've got to stop targeting Hindus for mass violence. It is absolutely unforgivable, totally unforgivable. But of course, there is this huge level of hypocrisy. And what the Hindu population tend to forget is that this targeted violence against the Hindu minority in Bangladesh is exactly what has happened in India in the recent past and what is still happening in India in places like Manipur, where Christians, for example, there was something like 350 churches burnt to the ground last year, Christian churches. But again, you don't sort of see much of that being talked about by the same right-wing people who were trying to say they're targeting us in Bangladesh. Yeah, but your extremists are targeting Christians, for example, in Manipur. Your extremists have been targeting Sikhs in the Punjab and other areas for generations. They've been targeting Muslims in Kashmir for generations, basically since partition in 1947. So there is this huge level of hypocrisy here, and we are absolutely in fully support of calling out the violence against Hindus, the Hindu minority in Bangladesh. That is unforgivable, and that has to be prevented. But ultimately, the Hindus in India, these right-wing extremists who are making a big deal of it, well, unfortunately, you need to look at your own house and get your own house in order, because again, you people are guilty of the same acts of violence against your minorities in India. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment, actually, in one of my stories. But ultimately, there is that deep level of hypocrisy. And it needs calling out and say, you can't call it out in Bangladesh and protest about it in London when actually you guys are guilty of the very same thing against your minorities in India, etc. So anyway, that's a point definitely need to be taken out. I'm delighted to see the return of this youthandviolence.com website. Again, this does point to a big problem that the Western world has suffered a lot, particularly in North America, these mass shootings that come from all sorts of different sources. And I would say there are probably two main roots of these mass shootings or mass acts of violence. First is just young, disaffected youth who, for some reason, just go off the rails. They feel ostracized, disengaged from normal society, and then they somehow get their hands on guns and then cause these dreadful mass shootings, which are just leave whole communities in devastation. Not just communities, actually whole nations in devastated shock. But then, of course, there is the sort of the more religiously motivated violence. And unfortunately, sadly, it does seem to be from one particular area, is Islamic extremists that have been behind a lot of these mass acts of violence. Bondi is just the latest example. Unfortunately, North America, and particularly here in the UK, we have suffered these acts of mass violence that have come from these religious extremists. So it is very important that these things are nipped in the bud, as we say in English, and that we try and, when these leakages of information do come out somehow, that they are acted upon. Of course, our intelligence services, whether it's CSIS Canada or CIA or FBI in the US, and here our own MI5, our own domestic intelligence agencies, when they get they see these signs, unfortunately, they tend to, they have blocked most of them, but unfortunately, they have to be absolutely right, 100% right. I can't speak properly 100% of the time because unfortunately the odd one does manage to leak through, and it is unfortunately it is easy in hindsight to say all the signs were there, but unfortunately all the signs are there thousands of times, and 999 times out of 1,000 those individuals don't actually then go on to cause a mass shooting. Unfortunately, it is that 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a million or whatever it is. And that's the problem, is that, yes, they probably do see these leakages and the signs are there, but it's only in retrospect can you see, oh yes, it was that specific one that then led onto a mass act of violence. So unfortunately, it is a huge challenge to try and prevent these things. And well done to our security services that do fortunately manage to prevent most of them. It's just sadly that the odd one does come through. And then there was a referral, as you said, James, to AI. When these particularly youngsters actually go on AI now and they use these AI as some form of therapy. Again, it's so dangerous. This should not be allowed, because ultimately AI has no empathy. It is literally, it's binary. It's ones and zeros. It is a computer that you're talking to. It is a machine. A machine is never going to understand human emotions well, I say never's a long time, but certainly in the foreseeable future, machines are never going to have that level of empathy of a human being. And so, God help humanity if it ends up relying on machines to provide therapy to all of us. And unfortunately, AI does tend to be this sort of this doom loop of feeding. It becomes an echo chamber. It feeds the sort of the feelings of an individual who's using it, and it has been known to drive people to suicide, because it tells these people, actually logically, what you're saying, yes, the ultimate solution is yes, you have to kill yourself. So these individuals go off and kill themselves, which is again unforgivable. So, and then finally, just a quick wrap up on the racist angle and racism in politics as well. Unfortunately, yes, we do see a lot of racism against people like Jagmeet Singh was a prime example in Canada, James. I mean, the abuse that he received, even when serving in office, it was just shocking. And again, I do find it quite ironic, particularly in North America. You see right-wing extremists, being racist and saying, "Get out of my country," and I always laugh and say, well, actually, North America, relatively speaking, and all due respect to North America, it is a relatively young country. The whole country, bar the indigenous Indians, are all immigrants anyway. So it is not your country. Well, it's sort of it's now this great sort of melting pot of cultures. But ultimately, it's very hypocritical again for right-wing extremists in North America to be racist against these people. But unfortunately, it's driven by anger. And we've referred to this a lot recently about the rising anger in Western society. It's been driven by all sorts of different agenda. Excuse me, whether it's but again, it's generally political. It's mass immigration has created a huge amount of anger, and I think a lot of root cause of the racism that we're seeing now, that is extending from extreme right wing, actually even to sort of mainstream people. I would say people who more sitting more comfortably in the centre. They are now starting to sort of almost by default refer to racist tropes, because again, their anger is such and driven by such mass immigration and uncontrolled immigration that their anger needs an outlet. And of course, they target people who are high profile, whether it is Jagmeet Singh or Jas Singh that was you referred to. It's unforgivable, but it's understandable, sadly. And we see it a lot here in the UK. I've seen the huge rise in racism, again, primarily driven by these root causes that we talked about. And unfortunately, it's division and it's hate. And again, we always try to look behind the scenes. Well, what is driving division and hate? It seems to be some sort of agenda that is rolling out across Western democracies to drive the wedges between our communities. And it can only be prevented when we recognise it happening in the first place. It's very easy. We're seeing the right turned against the left. We're seeing communities driven against each other, whether it's Sikhs and Muslims or Hindus or Christians or whatever. We're all seeing just this huge fractures appearing in our society that are being driven by certain factors. We must be totally aware of it, James. So, and I'll tell one of my stories is going to be very relevant to all this in a moment. But ultimately, James, yes, I think it's sad to see the rise in racism. The only thing we can do, the majority of us, which is the 80-90% of us who do not exist in the extremes, either left or right, is to try and recognise it for what it is and trying to bring our communities together.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that as the economy is in the perilous situation that it is at this time, you have grocery prices going up, you have housing shortages, you have affordability issues outside of just the grocery budgets. You've got a lot of different issues. And then you also have strain on infrastructures, lack of family doctors, a lot of these different issues. So when you open the borders to mass immigration, you are putting more strain onto these structures, which is something that we've seen is a unstable or uncontrolled immigration policy that now countries are trying to rein in and trying to adjust. But at the same time, all of these impacts, whether they are to do with the mass immigration or whether it's to do with world economics and other socio impacts, we have to remember that it's going to be used by those with an agenda. to say, oh, well, the economy's gone to crap over the last several years, and then we've let in this many people. So it makes it easy for them to switch the narrative to the political policies, to trade imbalances, to a lot of other issues, as well as immigration. So it's not one foundational point that we can say, this is it. This is the reason. But I'll guarantee that those bots that are trying to separate and to create imbalance and anger on both sides or on either side, they're going to exploit this, and it makes it that much easier when people are already feeling the impacts of all of the other things that are coming in on them.
Exactly that. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. It's just this anger that is rising massively in particularly Western societies at the moment, because people are just angry about, as you say, cost of living and mass immigration, the lack of infrastructure. Certainly here in the UK, we're having problems getting a doctor. You can't see a doctor within a month of ringing up, etc. And all these things just drive this anger. Yeah. This anger needs to find an outlet, and unfortunately, it is those most vulnerable potentially in our societies that tend to be the targets of these anger. And it manifests itself in all sorts of things, like, again, those terrible rapes, for example, we had here in the UK, these hate crime rates, which, again, unforgivable.
Right.
Anyway, talking about division and hatred, in India, I was horrified, actually, over the Christmas period, to read a story that was reported in the Quint, it's sort of an online newspaper. It's a website or a news outlet that I do actually have a lot of time for. They write some quite interesting, well-researched articles, and they reported on a meeting that took place just recently. I'll call up the article so you can actually I'll cherry pick some of the key details of this, but it does make quite shocking reading about some of the things that were discussed. It was a meeting of the Sanatan Rashtra Shankhnad Mahotsav in Delhi. Now, what is the Sanatan Rashtra Shankhnad, whatever it's called? You have to excuse my pronunciation. It is another affiliated unit of the RSS. And what it refers to, the Sanatan Rashtra, of course, is like the Hindu Rashtra. It's this call for this united nation that is ultimately exclusively Hindu, where citizens are righteous, temples prosper, cows are revered, Vedas are lived, and truth governance. And then the SRSM is the first step to revive that sacred Bharat, that sacred Hindu Rashtra. So, in this big gathering of several thousand people who got together in Delhi, there was all sorts of speakers, lots of sort of, as part of this big conference, all sorts of things discussed. But it was the statements that were made by many of these speakers that actually hit the headlines. And again, many of my podcasts, we've often compared to the rise of the RSS and Hindutva with the rise of Nazism and the Aryan superior race, this sort of white supremacist or genetic supremacy of the Aryan race that the Nazi party were pushing in the 1930s in Germany. Well, the Hindutva follows that same sort of playbook, and some of the statements that came out of this statement out of the conference are, I have to say, frighteningly familiar and similar to those sort of statements that were coming in a different context out of 1930s Germany. So let me just quickly flash through this, just to give you a flavour of the sort of things that were discussed. Now, it included all sorts of people at this conference, but of course they all were united in their sort of support of the Hindutva ideology. And it included union ministers and Hindutva activists. And when I say union ministers, there were members of the Indian state in representation here. And there was representing, essentially, the Indian government, certainly indirectly. They called for mass deportation, mass conversion of Muslims, and constitutional change to make this Hindu Rashtra. And as it said, there were over 3,000 people who attended that conference, including members of the Delhi Tourist Office. Demands for the Hindu Rashtra and mass deportation were raised at this event, attended by the Union Ministry of Culture and Delhi's Tourism Ministry. Again, these are official state organisations that are now seen at this effective Nazi rally, which again is quite shocking. So, including some of the statements that came out. For example, one guy, Suresh Chavanki, he's the owner of a television station. He came out with statements including, we must deport 25% of Muslims from India and impose a population cap. In other words, he's actually saying we cannot have more Muslims than we want. Let's cap the population, and anybody over and above that number we'll have to deport. And it included statements like, we're going to ban 4 marriages and multiple children for Muslims. There should be a cap of 1 wife and 2 children in the Muslim community. There needs to be a cap on the population. It should be the same population or the same percentage as during partition in 1947. The government's priority should be to reduce the Muslim population. Hindus need to have more children. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. Yeah, this is not a contentious statement, but there is this encouragement for Hindus to have more children. In other words, look, we're being overpopulated by Muslims, so Hindus, we need to fight back, and we must have more than 2 children. So go out and tell the Hindus, you must have more children. And then those who are too old to have children should tell their children and servants to have children. And then he also made the statement that we will take care of killing of jihadis and the killing of Muslims. Again, it goes on to say, this was, again, a high-ranking BJP official and a Supreme Court lawyer, a guy called Ashwini Upadhyay. He said, we need to carry out mass conversions of Muslims into Hindus. All mandirs, gurdwaras, Jains, Buddhist temples, Mas and Kavachaks should become centres of Garwapsi. Now, I had to look up this word Garwapsi. What does Garwapsi mean? It means a homecoming. It is a movement that encourages individuals who have converted to other religions to return to their original religious belief. Now, this comes back to this concept that these Hindutva people believe that everybody's a Hindu, but they have then since converted to other religions, but ultimately they were all Hindus. So they need to be reconverted back to Hindus, essentially by force, and that is what this concept of Garwapsi means. And he said, there are so many businessmen here at this conference, they can easily force their employees to convert. So again, if you own a business, you've got to force your employees, if they're not Hindus, to convert to Hinduism. If Garwapsi happens, there'll be no terrorism, no stone pelting, food will be pure, people won't spit on your roti, urinate on your fruit and defecate on your dal. And again, this is straight out of the Nazi playbook. If you all become good Nazis, then society will be perfect. We will get rid of these evil people. Again, you can see the parallels to 1930s Nazism. And he said, mass Garwapsi is the only solution. Mass conversion to Nazism, effectively, again, you can see the parallel. It's mass conversion to Hindu is the only solution, the final solution. Ral Dewan of the Hindu Fund, another Hindutva spokesperson, large-scale Garwapsi is the only solution. Dewan has consistently been calling upon Hindus to become more missionary in their efforts. In other words, to go out and forcibly convert people. In other words, again, there's this very aggressive, this very proactive drive to convert people to Hinduism. And let me just quickly take a side comment there. Compare that to Sikhi, that definitely has quite the opposite of this concept. There is no forced conversion in any element of Sikhi. There is in other religions. Christianity has a very missionary base to go out and convert people to Christianity, and likewise many other religions have that same sort of ideology. Sikhi doesn't. It's one of the strengths, I would say, of Sikhi, is that it has no policy to deliberately force people to convert to Sikhi. He also demanded, this is an important point, he demanded that the constitution be changed to make India a Hindu Rashtra. Now, those who are familiar with the Indian constitution know it is a secular constitution. It refers to all the various religious entities, ethnicities within India. Apart from the sad fact that it does include Sikhs within wraps up under the umbrella of Hindus, which again was controversial at the time. But ultimately, India constitutionally is a secular nation. That is one of the foundational principles of India, that it is a secular nation, that no favour is given to any one particular religious community, that everybody's treated as equal in theory, and sadly in practice that is not the case. But certainly there is a demand here that the constitution is actually rewritten to say that it is a Hindu-only nation, a Hindu Rashtra. Again, that's a shocking thing to demand. And then he supported anti-conversion laws, the bulldozers of justice. This is literally where they send the bulldozers to flatten Muslims' homes and other minorities' homes. Love jihad awareness. In other words, be aware of this claim that the Muslims had this policy to deliberately marry Hindu women to convert them to Muslims. Only Hindus as AC mechanics and painters, that's a bit random, uniform civil code, etc., etc. These are all defensive strategies. We need an offensive strategy. We need a constitutional Hindu Rashtra. Again, this demand that we become more aggressive to push the Hindu extremist agenda. Now, there were over 3,000 delegates and representatives from more than 800 Hindu organisations from across India participating in this two-day event. Again, this shows the level of support for this extremist ideology. This is frightening that there were over 800 organisations from the Hindu community represented at this conference. Saints, scholars, central and state ministers, entrepreneurs, advocates, thinkers and defence experts collectively resolved to work for the protection of Sanatan or Hindutva culture and the establishment of this Hindu Rashtra, this Sanatan nation. It is a matter of pride that along with the Union Ministry of Culture, Delhi Tourism is also part of this event. Again, these are state bodies involved in this event. This isn't just an event of extremists on the periphery, as often happens, and in a democracy you're always going to get this. But this is actually attended and supported by state bodies. So essentially this is saying that the Indian government supports this idea. So anybody who thinks it's all a conspiracy theory about the RSS and Hindutva trying to take over the Indian government, I'm sorry, the truth is out there. It is that state bodies are publicly supporting these events, these pro-Nazi ideology events. And as a wrap-up, it says... The event included a sketch, which showed a Hindu woman being killed by a man dressed as a Muslim who smashed her head with a rock. I mean, how provocative. Shown as a self-defense demonstration, the skit went on to show the Muslim-dressed man being stabbed to death. The Sanatan Santha is a hardline Hindutva organisation founded by hypnotherapist giant Balaji Attaval in Goa in 1999. So again, its roots is with some extremist idiot, basically. But it's being probed. It is allegedly being probed by the Karnataka police after the murder of an individual. But the organisation has consistently denied any involvement in the killings. Okay, that's a bit of a sort of a side issue. But the real danger here is the growth and the state-sponsored growth of Hindutva ideology. We talk about it regularly. We do know that the BJP government is essentially an arm of the RSS. But the conference alone and some of the statements that were made, again, as I said, James, come out of the Nazi playbook. It is absolutely terrifying.
Absolutely. And with today's day and age, when you look at the glossing over of the human rights issues in India, when you look at the international governments that are willing to do trade deals, to do security deals, to turn a blind eye to the atrocities that are taking place against minorities in India, again, you're going to see not only within India, you're going to see around the world where people feel that if they have something to trade where it's transactional, then they can get away with more and more of these atrocities and more of this attitude that they can segregate, that they can force conversion, that they can treat minorities in a way that is just against any common sense and against international human rights laws. And when you read this article, I mean, you can refer back up to a certain section where they are stating essentially that these people are shitting in your food, that they are peeing in your food, they're spitting in your food, that they are contaminating what you're eating, among other things. And I mean, this is just insane that they are putting this out there and expecting for the world to look at this and believe it. And unfortunately, it is being supported, as you said, Angus, by certain levels of government and politicians and people of prominence and power. And that is what is really scary about where things are heading.
Indeed, and again, it always comes full circle to the simple solution. There is only one solution for the minorities in India, and that is the breakup of India. If these Indian extremists need their own Hindu Rashtra, fine, that is your democratic right. But ultimately, you've also then got to allow the minorities, in particular the Sikh people, the Sikh community, to establish Khalistan so that they can under their own democratic right, live under their own laws, their own rules, their own policies. So by all means, have your Hindu Rashtra, but at the same token, you've then got to allow Khalistan, the establishment of Khalistan, so that people can then, who don't want to be part of your Hindu Rashtra, and there's no point having a Hindu Rashtra where you're forcibly having people live under your regime. It's like the Soviet Union. People were trying to flee the Soviet Union. They had to literally be held in by force from fleeing, which is why ultimately it broke apart. So if you want a peaceful, happy Hindu Rashtra where you can all practice your Hindu extremism together, then absolutely, by all means, do it, but don't force people into it. Let them be there voluntarily. And therefore, people who want to leave can then set up Khalistan, and then whether Kashmir becomes independent or whatever it is. But ultimately, you have your bit, but you've got to let other communities have their own democratic right to self-determination as well. So anyway, James, let's move on to my second story. And this, yes, as we referred to, this is in New Zealand. There was a Nagar Kirtan, a celebration being that was unfolding. This happened just over Christmas and just before Christmas, and I did watch it unfold. And across social media, the backlash was enormous. This Nagar Kirtan, it happened. It was organised originally by the Nanak Sar Gurdwara Sahib in again, excuse my Maori pronunciation, but the Manurewa suburb of Auckland in New Zealand, and it was brought. The Nagar Kirtan was brought to a sudden halt when it came up against a protest by members of a far-right organisation known as the True Patriots of New Zealand. Now, these guys, I'll give some commentary in a moment, but just to give you a clue of what they came up against, have a look at this.
Oh, Jesus Christ is the God of the nation! There shall be no other God! Among you! Lord!
I saw these videos and I just laughed, and I'll explain why. I just laugh in despair. But a public statement, the protesters claimed, if you come here, you adapt to New Zealand's ways. You don't bring separatist agendas, religions, racial division, or foreign power struggles with you. Now, these guys, these white guys, and I'll play another sort of video in the background as I speak, so you can see some of the coverage. There you go. These are white guys who are doing the haka. The haka is a traditional dance of the Maoris, the indigenous people of New Zealand. In fact, arguably, I think they weren't even indigenous in New Zealand. They were from the Pacific Islands, but that's another story. But ultimately, these are white men doing the haka. That is not a white cultural dance. It is a dance that they have appropriated. And they are coming out with statements like, I mean, you heard them in that first video, Jesus Christ, something or other. Again, you can see the level of religious extremism here. These are Christian extremists. But they are telling the Sikh community, go home, you don't belong here, don't bring your religion, your racial division, etc. And yet here are some Christian extremists saying our God is basically the only God. Again, you can see the division. But adopting a dance that isn't even anything to do with white people who have all come from Europe or the UK or wherever it is that these people have come from. So the level of hypocrisy here is why I'm laughing. And I actually got involved in all sorts of arguments I couldn't resist on social media. I had to wade in when I saw these being broadcast on social media, and you got these white extremists or these racists coming up saying, yeah, keep these bloody Indians out. And I was sort of, you can't resist coming in. Well, hang on. You guys are all immigrants. And these idiots out here doing the haka are trying to say, don't bring your foreign cultures to our nation as they go and adopt the Maori Haka, which is nothing to do with these white idiots. Again, it's risible, and again, I just think it's absolutely shameful. Now, the good thing is, thank heavens, that most New Zealand white people are actually decent people. I've got a lot of time for the Kiwis, as we call them. But these idiots on the right wing, these are religious extremists, and these people, frankly, are just as dangerous as Islamic extremists or any extremists from any other religion. These people are a bunch of absolute idiots who have absolutely no idea of the hypocrisy that they are doing. But also, they claim to be religious people. They claim to worship their own God. And yet, they stand out there sowing division and hatred and this extremist ideology that I'm sure any God, whichever God anybody happens to worship, I'm sure any God that exists is going to look at these people and shake his or her heads in disbelief, saying, oh dear, James.
Absolutely. And let's face it, one day they'll have to, if there is a God and they are facing judgment, he's going to look at them and say, you're an idiot. You were not representing me, and don't bring my name into it. Like, it's kind of like Will Smith said on the Oscars there, keep her name out of my mouth or out of your mouth sort of thing before he slapped them. And that's what God's going to do. He's just going to slap these idiots and hopefully knock some sense into them. But it's going to be too late for them to be sensible on earth. So again, it just shows. And just quickly, Angus, it also brings into the very dangerous point that we've discussed about provocateurs, and all it takes is one or two in a crowd that is this, let's say, adrenaline rush and testosterone and rage. All it takes is one or two provocateurs that could turn something like this violent, and that's all it is. It's the wolf pack mentality, and that's what's really scary about this, is that as you said, whatever religion you are, you should be respecting others regardless of differences. And this definitely could be a powder keg waiting to explode.
Yeah, indeed. And again, I'm just looking at the T-shirts. It says, keep New Zealand, New Zealand. Well, ultimately, you guys represent New Zealand just as much as the Sikh community does. But ultimately, it's the Maoris who have more rights. It's the indigenous, or the let's just say the original occupants of New Zealand. Weren't you guys? It was the Maoris, those people whose culture you seem to have appropriated for your own purposes. Again, I just shake my head in absolute disbelief. These people can keep a straight face and make statements like that and dance the haka, which is nothing to do with white culture. Anyway. Let's move on, Jez, because again, I can. I know.
Here's just one quick thought. Maybe the next time the Sikhs could wear the Keep New Zealand shirts, just like they could
Yes.
keep Canada shirts, because we're all a melting pot of so many nationalities.
Exactly that. And I did actually, in the background, you could hear the shouts of Boli Sonihal, which again is the war cry of the Sikhs. And I suddenly thought, if you were there and it did turn violent, I know which side I would put my money on. It's certainly not those idiots wearing Keep New Zealand's side that I think would prevail in that situation. I think faced with an army of Sikhs shouting "Bully son of hell," I think if I was there, I'd be running very fast in the opposite direction. So, anyway, James, let's move on to our comment section. And this was I did just as we signed off for Christmas. I did a final sort of podcast with Layla, our US correspondent, and we talked about Khalistan, and the subject of the podcast was basically is there support for Khalistan within the Punjab, or is it just a phenomenon that exists outside in the diaspora? And we covered obviously all sorts of angles of that. But we had loads of comments. Thank you for all of you who did comment on that podcast. Amrik Singh starts us off with that you recorded, and we did talk about how the feelings for Khalistan, the support for Khalistan, is passed down through the generations, and how important it was. And as Amrik says, I recorded news clips about 1984 and what happened there, Operation Blue Star. And you said you kept them and you kept re-watching them for years. We educated our children and grandchildren. Never forget 84. This is such an important point, James, that we talk about regularly, is the importance of, and us as a raising the podcast, is ensuring that the young generations understand their history, the history of their community, understand what did happen in 1984, which to them is obviously years ago, but for many of us, it sort of seems like yesterday. It is still very much fresh in people's minds because it did impact families that are still very much alive today. So again, James, how important it is to keep the stories alive and pass them down through the generations to maintain that cultural link.
Absolutely. And as I said, even after tomorrow's show, I will still on my other channels and on my social media definitely, keep that in mind and bring education to the masses, because just because you won't see me on Savage doesn't mean I won't be out there advocating for Khalistan and for human rights.
Indeed, and don't worry, James, when Khalistan happens, you'll still be very much there with me having our cup of tea in Khalistan, right, celebrating the establishment of that great nation. Playlist Overlord says, great discussion, thank you. Who will be the first to recognise and support Khalistan? Will it be NATO, USA or China? Well, that's a good question. I actually don't know. I think USA, well, China, let's start with China. China would love to recognise it, because China strategically would know what a problem it could potentially be ultimately for its own enemies if China had any form of control over it. So China, I have no doubt, will be queuing up to support financially the establishment of Khalistan, knowing that any financial support that comes from China always comes with a hook, with a sting in the tail. It always comes with a price to pay, and that price is essentially it becomes a vassal state of China. So China, I've no doubt, would love to support Khalistan, but that, I say, comes with its own dangers. But USA, that is something that we're working on, and NATO, ultimately, NATO will be the final arbiter. NATO will be hopefully the final organisation or unit that will decide legally if and when Khalistan will happen, James.
Well, and I would add one more in there, and that would be the United Nations, and that's where I think the first recognition officially will begin. I do believe that a lot of the nations in the United Nations will give recognition as a part of that unity.
Actually, yes, apologies. You're absolutely correct. I was reading NATO as United Nations. Of course, it is the United Nations. Yeah. Indeed, that will do that. That is the final arbiter. NATO, of course, is something very different. Yeah. And actually, that is a whole different discussion. Would Khalistan be a member of NATO? That's a very big question and a huge debate whether it should or shouldn't be. Being where it is strategically, it would be great if it was part of NATO. It would enjoy that protection of NATO. Ultimately, it may be too provocative, being effectively on China's border. Who knows? We'll see. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion. But thank you, Playlist Overlord, for your comment. Stay Safe comes with a quote from Benjamin Franklin, all about freedom. Every man, it is the common right. By the laws of God, a free man is entitled to the free enjoyment of liberty. Ultimately, James, this is exactly what we are all about. It's all about freedom of speech and the freedom of expression, the freedom to practice one's religion. Essentially, it is our basic human right. That is what Khalistan stands for.
Absolutely. And again, thank you to Stay Safe, because I'm assuming he, could be a she, just contributes a lot to the program, but also to the Substack, and just a lot of thoughtful, insightful comments that we appreciate. And yeah, absolutely. It's all, it's all about empowerment. So we'll watch and see.
Indeed, and we have many regular contributors, and thank you to each of you, and particularly Stay Safe. You do put a lot of well thought out comments on beneath the videos. Right, the next set of comments. This is essentially we talked about why Khalistan should be established. Again, we've been through the reasons hundreds of times. But Singh Aujla says the people of Punjab are shut up if they open their mouths. Talk about freedom. Then, of course, Hindutva and the Indian government are weaponising lawfare, as we call it, under things like the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the National Security Act, etc., etc. These methods are being used to silence dissent. There is no place in a democracy to weaponise law like this. Likewise, Sher Singh comes with a similar sort of comment, saying it's the media that controls the narrative. Again, it's the government control the media, which essentially means there is only one Hindutva narrative that comes out. Chadi Kala, in other words, we will prevail, don't worry. And S. Baines wraps up this set by saying, ultimately, we mustn't forget that India was put together, essentially cobbled together, as you say, by force, by the British. The British Empire brought this artificial construct of India together. It doesn't exist by any natural evolutionary, social evolution as a country. It was literally brought together by the British Empire and essentially handed over to the Brahmins in 1947 to continue that sort of colonial control. So ultimately, as S. Baines said, it's going to fall apart. You cannot keep something like this together indefinitely, that it is essentially an artificial construct that, as we say, James, is enforced through things like the UAPA, the NSA, this weaponizing of the law. Ultimately, the writing is on the wall, James.
Absolutely, and to the benefit, in some ways, to J&K, to the formation of Khalistan and other regions, because all that they are doing is pushing people towards the balkanization of India, and I think that they are starting to realize that now, and that's why they are clamping down. That's why we're seeing so many different fractures forming within the foundation of the Indian government and the BJP.
Yeah, as we approach the end game, and they know that the end game is fast approaching, ultimately it can go one of two ways. It ultimately goes into mass force, violence and mass control by the Indian state, which they're trying. But ultimately, it always ends up in a fracturing, a mass breakup, a balkanization, as we saw with the Soviet Union. You can only keep it going indefinitely. Harjinder Baraj says, Sikhs throughout the world back Khalistan due to the Indian state's policies against Sikhism, and genocide of Sikhs is one of them, indeed. And then Pritam Korman follows up with Punjab was originally divided at partition, where the bulk of it went into Pakistan. And says, you say, the Punjab, Pakistan still speak Punjabi over the border in Pakistan. Both Pakistan and Punjab wants the merge. So again, it's coming back to the old boundaries of the original Punjab, pre-partition Punjab, which of course most of it did sadly fall onto the other side of the border into Pakistan, but they still retain Punjabi as a language. And then Bal Singh follows up with, every Sikh wants Khalistan. Those who oppose Khalistan, they're not the real Sikhs. And again, we talk about this quite often, these Kezadari Hindus with uncut hair, and others, these fake Sikhs that we often report, Jess. So ultimately, the support for Khalistan, it is global, it is in the diaspora, but it is also obviously within Punjab itself, in Indian Punjab. But interestingly, as Pritam Korman says, it's likewise, actually, there's clearly a level of support within Punjab in Pakistan.
Absolutely, and I think that once you see the foundation laid out for Khalistan, I think that you're going to see a lot of cooperation between Pakistan and Khalistan, and I think that border will be a lot more fluid than it traditionally is at this point.
Indeed, we do know there are definitely a lot of viewers that we have in Pakistan who do express support for the whole concept, so which is great. So. Awais says, talking about Pakistan, excuse me, so I'm suffering from a bit of winter flu at the moment. Do we have an audio track option in Urdu? Well, James, probably more your department on the technical side, but I don't think we do we?
Not that I'm aware of. However, they are continually adding the different tracks into YouTube. They are expanding at a rapid pace. So keep an eye out. It may be something that pops up in the next month or the next year. But you can also find out, just email Google or YouTube and find out when that is coming, that language. And yeah, you may be surprised at how quickly that does come and how quickly you can get that translation of our programs. Yeah,
so apologies to you, Awais. Unfortunately, our own Urdu is not very good. It's not much better than our Punjabi, sadly, but hopefully technology will come to your aid soon. SSI Singh, thanks guys. Yeah, there were a couple of, in fact, there was lots of really, really positive, lovely comments. Thank you. Again, it's just a sort of a blanket thank you to many of you who did write some very nice comments after that podcast with lots of emojis, which featured widely in the comments as always. And user DD comes back with it again, talking about reading my Punjabi. Thank you to Google Translate. Sadly, I have to give away my secret, which ultimately says Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. And I think there's a few Akals in there and a Chardi colour, which is always nice. But thank you all for such a courageous, meaningful words. Well, thank you all, the commenters, James. As we always say, we couldn't do this show without them.
Absolutely, and we read them, and we really appreciate them more than the viewers know. It is a show that's made up of everybody. It's not just us. It's even more importantly the audience.
Indeed, and the final, very positive as always, sign off to the show comes from Grow Up AZ, who says Khalistan Zindabad, and Basra, a very optimistic and totally validated comment. Punjab will be free soon. Khalistan Zindabad, Khalistan Zindabad. And on that note, we will finish the show for the day. And as always, it is a big thank you to all of you who have contributed in the comment section. Thank you. Do keep those comments coming. They're all much appreciated. Do let us know your thoughts, your perspectives, or anything that you think we need to know about. If you hear any rumours or any gossip, let us know, because we can then do some digging from our side to find out if there's a real story behind it. And thank you for all of you who have been emailing us directly. Thank you to many of you who have emailed us regularly with the links and stuff. They are appreciated. Even if we don't respond, we still have read them, which is we're rushing to produce the shows. But thank you, we do read your emails as well. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.